I had a viewer reach out to me today asking if I can help them with Boolean operations in Blender. Now, a Boolean operation is where you are trying to join two parts together or cut some geometry out of a piece of geometry or intersect two pieces of geometry. Boolean operations in Blender can be tricky, and there are a few steps that you can take to ensure that you get correct Booleans every time. So if that's something that might be of interest to you, stick around and I'll show you how it's done. I watched your video on being able to click your parts together without glue. First off, thank you. You're welcome. I had been looking for something like this. This is perfect. If I could just get it to work. I downloaded your STL file and I can use it fine with basic shapes and other things that I create in Blender. However, I am having trouble using it for the actual model I want to print. I have a video game helmet that I got off the internet that someone else ripped, so I did not build it. I am having to break the helmet into parts to print so that I can print it full size. I am still fairly new to Blender. My intention was to use your part along with the Boolean modifier and my helmet to break the helmet up and be able to reassemble it. When I do this, the helmet is not modified as expected. I am fairly certain I am using the Boolean modifier correctly, as I have been able to use your part with basic shapes as a test, and in those tests the shapes were modified as expected. Would you mind sharing some knowledge as to how you incorporate this part into your own models, and perhaps what oddities I should look for in my model that may be causing the Boolean modifier to not act as expected? Thank you for your time, Jennifer. First up, thank you for saying thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. The Boolean modifier in Blender, I'm sure you are using it correctly, but there's a few steps and a few things you need to be aware of that could cause the Boolean process to fail. And I'll run you through those in a tick. If you want to see the video that Jennifer was referring to, the video she watched about clicking your parts together, that's your click your 3D prints parts together video I made with a little while ago. And I'll put a link to that video in the description below. So let's get over to Blender and I'll show you a couple of things that you need to be aware of before creating Booleans in Blender. The first thing you need to be aware of, and it's not an obvious thing, is that your scale of your scene has a big impact on how the Boolean operation works. By default, Blender assumes you're going to be building cars, houses, worlds, and when we're creating parts for 3D printing, we're working at a much smaller size. So instead of working with items that are meters across, we're working with items that are centimeters across. So the first thing that I do, and I found to really help with solving issues with Boolean operations as the first step, is to go to your display tab and set the scale to 0.010. By default it could be 10 or 1, I can't remember what the default is, but if you set that to 0.010, that'll be the first step, because when Blender's trying to do a Boolean operation on something which is only 20 millimeters across, it's expecting it to be a meter across. And I've found that for whatever reason, if I have my scale set at a meter and I try and do things which are like 20 millimeters across, I just have issues all the time. So I found this will solve a lot of the problems. So set your scale to 0.010. And the other thing you want to do is set your, under the view listing, set your clip to 1 millimeter. It may be set to 10 millimeters by default. So just slide that all the way to the left. Now I've made a couple of shapes here, and I'm going to try and do a Boolean operation where I'm going to remove this shape from this half sphere I've got here. I've made a half sphere to try and simulate half a mask, if you like, just a simple shape. So if I select the object that I want to Boolean and go to my modifier tab, add a modifier, Boolean, and in this case I want to remove this shape from this shape, so it's going to be a difference operation. And what I'll do is I'll also select this shape, go to its object properties and turn it to wire. So that way we can see when it's been subtracted from this shape. Now the Boolean operation for removing is difference, and by default it's set to bmesh. Now let's see what happens if I try and remove this shape from this shape using the bmesh operation. I'm just going to grab my eyedropper and select my icosphere, and it's worked quite alright. What happens if I move this icosphere around to a different location? Okay. Okay, now you can see here what's happening is the Boolean operation is failing. I'm asking the Boolean to do a difference, which is to remove this shape from this shape. Now where it was positioned before, it's working fine. But if I had it positioned over here, it's no longer working. And that's caused by where the vertices are lining up in relation to each other. So how to cure this and how to fix this problem is that you'll find that this is caused by the scale of your object. And if I click on it, select it, you see here the scale is set to 7.92. So I created the sphere and scaled it up. Now when you're running a Boolean operation, you want to make sure that your scale is at 1. So to do this, I'll just remove this Boolean operation, select the shape, and I'm going to press Ctrl A and go to Apply and Scale. So now I've just applied the scale to, well, basically it's resetting the scale. So the shape hasn't changed, but you can see here in the numeric panel that the scale is now set to 1. Now let's try and run that same Boolean operation again using a difference modifier, a difference Boolean, and select our icosphere. And you can see here that the Boolean operation is now fine. If we move the mesh around, you can see it's working fine because there's a point there. See if I can line it up. There we go. So there's a point there where the bmesh Boolean modifier is not able to resolve that instance, even though we have applied the scale. So in those situations, that's where I switch to carve. I find that carve works. That's my default method of running Boolean operations. Bmesh I find to be works 99% of the time, but I find carve works all the time. So if you have an issue, if you've applied your scale to your mesh and you're using bmesh to create a Boolean solve and it's not working, switch to carve. I find that works all the time. Now let's see, I hope it doesn't make a liar out of me. If I move the mesh around, if we get any spots where it just can't solve the Boolean. And you can see there, it's not a problem. It's going to resolve it. It's slower, but it's going to resolve it every time. I find carve works for me every time. So what you need to do is to make sure your mesh is set to, the scale is reset to 1, and that's by pressing Ctrl A. If you look down the bottom left here, you'll see every key I'm pressing is recorded and shown here. So Ctrl A, scale, and apply the scale. Now, so that's 2 steps. You've got the scene scale that you need to set before you start working at these sorts of smaller models and things when you're working the millimeter and centimeter range. And then you've got to make sure that your model has been, the scale has been applied, and the rotation, if it's a rotation, I'd also do apply the rotation as well, which is, you'll see here you've got rotation and scale. You can do the same thing. Now there is one other step that you need to be aware of. But once you've run your Boolean operation, if I apply this now and move this shape out of the way, so that Boolean has now been solved, I can delete this and it's gone. The last thing you need to do, and before you do anything else, like if you want to add another shape to this, you need to do this before you do another Boolean operation, and that is to go to Edit Mode, select all your vertices, and I just pressed A twice then to make sure I got them all selected, and go to Mesh down the bottom left here, Mesh, Vertices, and Remove Doubles. Now you can see up the top here it's removed one vertice. By default this may be set to, I'm just looking at the bottom left down here, your tool options may be set to 1 millimeter by default. And if it's set to 1 millimeter, that means it's just going to scan a 1 millimeter area around each vertex and merge those vertices together. And you can see up here it removed, I'll go back, I'll slide this back down to the left, got one vertex, make this 1 millimeter. And if you look at the top of the screen, it'll tell you, it just briefly told you how many vertices have been removed. If I make this 10 millimeters, you can see here where it's removing 16,000 vertices and merging those together. So it's creating a much coarser mesh. But we can go back, if you while you're still in this mode, edit mode, and you haven't pressed the enter key or anything like that, or gone back to object mode, you can keep changing this tool setting as long as you want. So I'll take it back to 1 millimeter. And you can see at the top of the mesh there, it's starting to remove the vertices that are close together at the top there. And it will take it back down to, I'll just slide all the way to the left. And it's removed one vertex. So there was one vertex in there that was doubled up. And what that basically means is, after the Boolean operation, there were two vertices that were sitting on top of each other, that one vertex wasn't attached to any mesh. Or one piece of mesh was touching the other piece of mesh, but they weren't joined. So if you try and run another Boolean operation after that, you're going to get issues where you're going to have problems where the Boolean operation will fail again. So in this case, there was only one vertex that was deleted, but I've seen instances where I've had 1,000, 2,000 vertices merged together that were just sitting on top of each other. So now that we've got that mesh stable, solid, we've run our Boolean operation. Let's run another Boolean operation. I'm going to bring in that click fit system that I developed. In my case, I'm going to append it. If it's an STL file, you'll need to import it. And let's just grab part A. And you can see here we've got part A brought into the scene. Now, just keep in mind that this system is designed to work at the scale that I modeled it at. So the scale is that this cube here is a 20 millimeter cube. If you keep those parts at 20 millimeter cube measurements, they will click together and work well. If you scale it up, it's not going to work. And if you take it down smaller, it probably still will work, but it was designed and optimized to work at the scale that I built it at. So I'm going to try and Boolean this piece onto this face here. I'm just going to select my model and just check my scale. That's at 1. Check this model, scale is at 1, rotation's at 0. That's been applied. And let's take this over to this piece. And what I need is for this face here to be flush with this face here. So I'm just thinking about how I'm going to achieve that. I'm looking at my model here, and this face is not even. Now, if you're cutting your faces together, you will have this flush and flat. So what I'll do is I'll cut another piece out of here to make it flat. Just going to add a cube, scale it up, and pressing 1 on the numeric keyboard to get to my side view, or my front view, sorry. And I'm going to cut this shape out of this shape here. And the first thing I'm going to do is apply my scale. You can see the scale is now set to 9.5. Control A, scale, so that's now set to 1. I'm going to add a modifier, Boolean difference. I want to remove that. Switch to carve, so I know it's going to work. grab my eyedropper, select that and apply it, delete the cube, and now I have a flat face that I can attach this to. I'm just going to go to edit mode, check to make sure I haven't introduced any more doubles, select all my vertices, mesh, vertices, remove doubles. And you can see up top here, removed 0 vertices, so we're good. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap this object to the face, this face to this face of this object. And to do that, I'm going down to my little magnet snapping tool down the bottom of the screen here. Select that. I'm going to make sure it's set to vertice or vertex and closest. So we need to work out a way to snap this face to this object here. And probably the simplest way is going to be to set my pivot point of the object to this face here. And I can do that by pressing Tab, switch to edit mode, A to deselect everything, B to draw a box select around these vertices. And I'm going to press Shift S, cursor to selected. So it's going to move my cursor. This is my cursor up here. Shift S, cursor to selected. It's now snapped it to here. I'm going to press Tab, take me back to object mode, and I'm going to press Control Alt Shift C, and I'm going to set my origin to 3D cursor. So it's a good idea to get into the habit of using those shortcuts, but if you can't remember those shortcuts, you'll see that if we go to Tools tab at the top here, set origin, and I can set the origin there to origin to 3D cursor. And to snap I'll go back to edit mode, and with those vertices selected, I want to snap that cursor to those vertices. I can go down to mesh, snap, and cursor to selected, and you'll see my cursor just snapped there. And now our origin is now snapped to this plane here. In this case, what I would do is select my object, take it back to mesh, go to faces, and I'm just going to press A to deselect everything, B, do a box selection around the faces I want to delete, and press delete and faces. So now we have an object which has no geometry down here. This is the bottom of the object. So now if I press G, Z, boom, it's snapped to that point that we want to snap to. So those two edges are perfectly aligned. If I press 7 on my numeric keyboard, I can come down and have a look and just position this pin where I want it. I'll turn off my snapping, and that looks pretty good. So now what I can do is select my vertices and scale them, and I'm going to press Shift Z. I want to lock out the Z axis so it's not scaling on the Z axis. Alright, so that's now within those borders, and with the object back in edit mode, I'm going to switch to faces, select, there's no face. Okay, there's no face under there because I deleted that face. So what we need to do is create a face. So I'm going to just hold the Alt key down and click select that edge to select all the edges, and press F to create a face. Now what I can do is just drag that face down, and we have geometry going inside this other geometry. I'm just going to scale that so it's not protruding outside the edge of the geometry. And we need to keep that face exactly lined up with this face, because when you do the other side, the other piece that's going to click together, that face also has to line up with that face so the parts click together perfectly. So now we have this geometry here inserted inside this geometry, but it's not one piece, it's still two separate pieces. And because I have been mucking around with this geometry, adding faces, deleting faces, there is one thing you need to do to ensure that everything works properly, and that is to select all the faces, go to Mesh, normals, and recalculate outside. Sometimes when you do some operations, you'll find that your mesh, it's all grey or whatever colour, and one face or a couple of faces will be darker. And what's happened is those faces have flipped so that the normals are now facing inside. So what that operation has just done there is to just recalculate all the normals so that they're all facing outside and all the normals are facing in the correct direction, the correct way. So now that we've done that, I'm just making sure my scale is at 1 and my scale is at 1 on here. I can join these two pieces together. So I'm going to select my, my mesh, add a modifier, Boolean. In this case, we want to do a union. I'm going to select carve because I know that will work. Grab my eyedropper and select the item that I want to union with this piece here. If you press Z, you can see that it has done the operation perfectly, and there's the mesh that the piece that I inserted, and there's the new union mesh. So I can apply that, and I can remove this piece out, and you can see that's worked and joined perfectly. I can delete that now. So the next step is to do the remove doubles operation again. Always, after you've done a Boolean, always do it. It's going to save you so much stress later on. So select all my vertices, mesh, vertices, remove doubles, and you can see it's removed no vertices, so that's all worked fine. Now the keyboard shortcut for doing remove doubles is just W and remove doubles. That's the way I normally do it. Well, just thought I'll show you if you can get it through this way as well. So that's it. So we've got now successfully merged those two pieces. That's now one piece of geometry. When you export that, that'll export beautifully to an STL file, and you are good to go. So I hope that's helped explain a few things, and really it's a three-step thing. You've got to make sure your scale is set right for your world. You've got to make sure that your scale is applied to your model, so it's not a scale other than 1. And sometimes the rotation, if you've rotated it, you may need to apply the rotation as well. Make sure the rotation's at 1. And the third step is to use carve. Carve never lets me down. B-mesh can be flaky, as you saw. Most of the time it works, but sometimes it doesn't. So I always use carve. And once you've run a Boolean operation, make sure you remove any doubles. And before you do anything else, remove doubles, and then you can do another Boolean operation, and just keep going. As long as you remove your doubles as you go, you'll be fine. So I think that's it for now. So thanks very much for watching. If you have any other questions you want to ask me, just shoot me an email. My email address is below. I will try to answer your questions in a video where I find that answering a question like this one-on-one is useful, but if I make a video, then I know other people will be having issues with this. So I'll make a video where I think it's suitable and will help a lot of people. I know I'm probably going to be inundated with a lot of emails, and that's fine, but I won't be able to do them all. But where I think it's going to be a useful thing for other people to learn from it, then I will definitely make a video. So thanks again, have a great day, and I'll see you later.